History. Ruby was developed in 1993 by Yukiro Matsumoto. He wanted to develop an object-oriented scripting language. He did not like the way that Perl or Python worked, so he decided to create his own. He wanted to develop a language that is syntactically simple, truly object-oriented, having iterators and closures, exception handling, garbage collection, and he wanted it to be portable. The first public version of Ruby was 0.95, and it was released to some Japanese domestic news groups in December of 1995. Afterwards, Ruby version 1.0 was released a year later, and 1.1 was released in August of 1997. The first stable version of Ruby was version 1.2, and that was released in December of 1998. At the time, it was only available in Japan. Also in 1998, the first English homepage for Ruby was made, but Ruby was still localized in Japan. Ruby on Rails. Ruby on Rails really got Ruby to take off. This changed the history of rapid web development. Instead of using Ruby to write CGI scripts, Ruby on Rails used a model view controller structure that focuses on convention over configuration. This kind of model is good for developing web applications. It was first released in 2003 with version 1.8. This version had a large amount of changes. The changes included duck typing, fully qualified names, native YAML support, WebBrick, String.io, OpenURI, Pretty Printer, Ruby Wren, and many other features. Then, in 2004, Ruby Gems was released. Ruby Gems included new socket API, several random number generators, regular expression improvements, file loading performance improvements, test unit improvements, new encoding support, more string formatting tweaks, and much more. Golden Age. In February of 2013, Ruby 2.0 was released. This version helped stabilize the language in many ways. Some improvements were more speed refinements, such as safe monkey patching. Keyword arguments, there were UTF-8 by default improvements, new regular expressions engine, optimized garbage collection, and the addition of built-in syntax documentation. Boolean. Boolean data types check to see if something is true or false. It compares values to choose what the program does next. In this example, we set the array bool with true and false. Then we use a random number generator to generate a number of 0 or 1. This will select either true or false in the bool array, and the result will be stored in the variable male. If the male variable is true, the message "we will use name John" is printed out. Otherwise, "we will use name Victoria" is printed. Symbols. Symbols are used to represent other objects. Symbols are generated by placing a colon before an identifier, for example, :number or :symbol. Some methods convert objects to symbols using the toSym method. Symbols cannot be changed at runtime, and they are often used as hash keys because they are more efficient than strings. Keys are used to access values of a hash. Ruby can do lots of things with symbols. Some symbols are used as flags, just as enumerations are used for flags in C and C++. Integers. Integers are a primitive data type. They represent all whole numbers ranging from negative infinity to infinity. Computers are limited, though, so they can only work within a subset of integers. Unlike Java or C, integers in Ruby are objects of fixed num or a big num class. Fixed num numbers are integers up to a certain limit determined by the machine. Big num numbers are outside of the range of fixed num. Integers can also be specified in different notations such as decimal, hexadecimal, octal, and binary. Strings. A string is a data type representing textual data in a computer program. Ruby's string is a sequence of Unicode characters. Strings are enclosed in double or single quotes. For example, to declare a string, you would use P, open quotation, hello world, close quotation. Methods. Methods are used to bundle one or more repeatable statements into one unit. They are easy to implement in Ruby. Use the keyword def, D-E-F, to define a method and follow that with the method name. If the method accepts parameters, put those in parentheses after the method name. If statements. If statements are conditional structures. Ruby utilizes them very similarly compared to other languages. For example, if num is greater than 0, we'll check to see if the variable num is greater than the number 0. If this statement is true, the code will output the number is greater than 0. Loops. Loops are used to run a block of code until a specific condition is met. Ruby uses many of the same types of loops found in other languages, such as while loops, until loops, and for loops. There are also commands to control loops, such as break, redo, and retry. Redo. Redo will recall the most internal loop without checking the loop condition. Restarts yield or call from within the loop block. In this example, the redo command restarts the loop, but the iterator stays the same. Retry. If retry appears inside the rescue clause, it will restart the loop from the beginning of the begin body. If it appears in the iterator, block, or body, it will restart the invocation of the iterator call, and arguments to the iterator are re-evaluated. In the example, as the for loop runs, if some condition is met, it will restart the for loop and reset the iterator to its initial value. Exceptions. An exception is a special kind of object that indicates that something has gone wrong. Ruby terminates when an exception occurs. Ruby does not have exception handlers. Instead, the user must make their own exception handler, which is a block of code that is executed if an exception occurs during the execution of some other block of code. Raising an exception stops the normal execution of the program and transfers the flow of control to the exception handling code. This is where the problem is dealt with, or the program closes completely. If it exits or handles the problem depends on whether there is a rescue clause. The rescue clause is where the control flows to. Ruby has multiple predefined classes that help you handle errors. The formal exceptions are subclasses that extend the standard error class. Other exceptions are lower levels and are less recoverable conditions that a normal Ruby program does not usually attempt to handle. Syntax design. Ruby was designed to be object-oriented. Classes are introduced with the keyword class. Methods use the keyword def. All blocks end with the word end. Instance variables in a class are named with the leading @ symbol, and global variables have a leading $ symbol. Abstraction. An abstract class is a class that is declared but does not contain an implementation. They cannot be instantiated and require subclasses for implementations. Abstract classes are typically found in strongly typed languages. Their compiler checks to see that the abstract class is never created without its required subclasses. In Ruby, abstraction can be a little more complicated. You cannot know whether a class is implemented until you call it. It is possible to use a test suite to check all of these classes. Type checking. Ruby is a dynamically typed language. Dynamic typing means a programming language's variable types are not restricted to a single type of data. This means, for example, that one variable can store a number or a string at any given moment. However, trying to add a variable with a number and a variable with a string together will still result in a runtime error. In Ruby, it doesn't always matter what a variable type is, just as long as it responds to a certain method. Okay, we're going to go over how to make a Ruby program. First, we need to make sure that Ruby is installed on our computer. So you can get the Ruby installer from rubyinstaller.org. And for this tutorial, we're going to be using Ruby on a Windows computer. So after Ruby has been installed, we're going to run the start command with Ruby. You can find that under All Programs, Ruby, and Start Command Prompt with Ruby. I'm going to go ahead and make this full screen. Alright, so now that we're at the command prompt, we want to type in IRB and press enter, and this will allow us to start using Ruby code. So to create a simple Hello World program, we'll type the following into the terminal. Puts hello world, end quote, and press enter. So you see, it sent hello world to the terminal, followed by nil. So puts is a basic command in Ruby that prints out the command line. It will also return nil, and that is shown here in the form of nil. Okay, so Ruby can also run scripts for more complicated programs. For now, we're going to make a Hello World script. So let's open up a text editor, and let's save the file as helloworld.rb in a location. So here I've got it in the Ruby folder, which is in C, scripts. So we'll save it as Hello World. Okay. Now let's enter the first line. Alright, so this first line is called a shebang. It is optional, but it will let the interpreter apply any command line arguments that you may have set here. And this second line is going to be used for encoding purposes. So now we'll enter the code. Alright, we'll start with that. Go ahead and save the file. And now we'll run it. Now we need to exit Ruby, and we'll use the change directory command to find the file, the script that you just created. So it would be under C. I believe it's Ruby 23. Now we can, now that we're in the proper directory, we can go ahead and execute with Ruby and the name of our program. And you see it prints out Hello World.